And it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you.
Because we really also ongoingly finding out how dialogos is a practice of open society, and how a war situation like this in the middle of Europe, on one hand, is directly an attack on the open society, but also has to be responded to with a way that in the one hand really takes a position, but also allows to not become what you're fighting. Let's put it that way.
Yes, yes, yes. You don't want to become a monster when you're fighting monstrosity. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And what a dilemma that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a philosophically deep dilemma. You see Plato wrestling with it a lot, and he's wrestling with it in a lot of the dialogues about the relationship between a figure that's a transformative sage of dialogos, Socrates, and his relationship to Athens and to the political people and structure within Athens. It's a very tricky question, and so I'm interested to see what we might end up talking about together. And I'm reading a book by Stenmeyer, a very good book, very much aligned with a lot of the work I'm doing around dialogos and perspectival knowing and transformation. It's called Orientation, and he talks about orientation is the primary thing we need when we're lost and we don't know what to do and we can't find a way. And that he proposes to open up, not just a conceptual, because he wants the book, he explicitly said he wants the book to exemplify. So it's also an exemplification of phenomenological exploration of what it is we are doing when we are trying to properly orient ourselves, which is exactly the question I think you just raised. How do we properly orient ourselves towards this, such that we can bring about what Murdoch called the heart of morality, which is to properly apportion our attention and our attitude. And so I'm not sure about any of this, but I am sure that I would like to try and explore it and understand it, because I think what we're going to need to do is, okay, so I have to be very careful. There's a lot that needs to be done towards proper help and aid, but I think we also need to know what to do about this, in terms of what does this mean for us? How are we going to orient us? Are we going to let this go by another event? It could be something that's going to transform things such that events like this become less likely to happen. So there's a Kairos. Well, if we apprehend it correctly and collectively enough, there is a Kairos here. And then how do we properly orient ourselves towards it? So I guess I'll stop talking in a sec so you can respond, but I think there's two acts here. One is, what is the proper apprehension so that this is apprehended as a Kairos? And then what is the proper orientation to that Kairos so that we can increase the chance of the good being realized? That's what I see going on right now.
And for the audience, in case Kairos is a term that you don't know, Kairos meaning you could say a moment of opportunity, a moment of potential transformation.
Yes, it comes from Greek Christianity. It was made famous by the theologian Paul Tillich. It means it's not just time, it's timing. It's the fullness of time. It's the place at which things, as you said, can turn and shift in many different directions, radically so. And so people can make a difference in a Kairos in a way they can't in which situations are running along according to their normal inertia. It's like, it's not the same, but it's close to the notion of a tipping point. So when things are sort of running normally, it's very hard for our individual actions, even our collective actions, to move things very much. But when the situation is radically destabilized, as this kind of war does, and like World War II did, there is an opportunity for a radical reformulation.
And this is my experience of the situation. There is, for example, ongoingly, and with this war in a very violent way, our taking for granted to live in at least to a degree democratic society, an open society, is radically questioned. And at the same time, there is an unbelievable response in the Ukrainian people,
Yes.
which at least from a part of people we are talking to, is unbelievable, open-minded and big-hearted. And at the same time, we had conversations earlier this day with one of our Ukrainian friends who was asked if he hates Russians. And he said, no, I don't hate Russians, but I will kill them. I will kill them, and I will do it with love. And in fact, Guy Sengstock, who we had later on, out of something which happened to us, we didn't orchestrate, he happened to enter in a circling dialogue with him. And there was such a determination, but also humility and recognition of this Kairos moment that you're describing, transmitted through him. I mean, he said since 90 days, he's sleeping 3 hours a day because he said he seems to have meditation practice. I said, I cannot meditate right now because I feel every 10 minutes something needs to be responded to. Lives need to be saved in this. And at the same time, he was describing that in this horror, he experienced a deep freedom.
Yes.
So there was this recognition, and he brought it as a person, but I felt it. I felt it transmitted to all of us in the conversation. There are horrific situations like this. Questions are asked in a real way, in a very deep way, and it's just not as easy as usually to avoid them. And you're forced to question your own values, what I'm standing for, and how do I go about this in a way where also, and that's back to how we titled this event. We called it Defending the Heart of the Open Society. Just the appreciation, what is the open society? And I think the open society is very much connected to what you call dialogos.
Yes, I think
the capacity to find meaning through encounter, through open encounter. The capacity to do this together in small scale and big scale seems to be coming out as a value that is deeply important for this world.
And part of what's really interesting is that there is in these encounters with people from Ukraine, particularly people who have an integral meta-modern bent, because that's the milieu that we're connected to, that there is a transformative potential and a new narrative in what they're bringing forward that is very different from what you see in even the most well-meaning sort of classical journalism.
Yes.
That the story of good and evil, or nuclear superpower versus whatever the story is, or the story, we're all familiar with it. But there's right now it feels like they are starting to form a very different narrative of that allows for openness even in this context, and aspires to that is holding the values of the open society in a way that is not against, but still maintains the capacity of dialogos, even though dialogue is not appropriate at this moment.
Yes. Oh, oh wow, there's so much there. Okay, I guess what I would like to say then, I mean, and this is a Socratic point about the self-knowledge, which is what is the virtue that is appropriate to this situation? What is my responsibility beyond practical response? My concern is ways in which we might misapprehend and therefore miss the Kairos. And I think you're both alluding to that, and maybe we could focalize that and try to make it more explicit. Ways I see it being, or it seems to me that we're misapprehending it, and you made reference to the legacy media and how it's not really appropriately responding. Ways we could misapprehend this is we could misapprehend this as something that for which we should have a tremendous emotional response. I'm not saying we shouldn't have an emotional response, but we have an entertainment industry that has tutored us to seek emotional responses that go nowhere and that do nothing. And so my concern is that people will be satisfied with sort of an intense emotional reaction to the discussion around this and to the event itself. Another potential misapprehension is the opposite, which is to go into cold realpolitik and just look at this as sort of a technical thing. And here's the numbers, and here's the soldiers, and here's the geography, and here's what's going on, and here's the tactics. And then that also, I think, will just allow us to make this history before it's even done in a way that prevents it from being something that challenges us to transformation. And then the third misapprehension is the one that I think Elizabeth pointed to, which is we go to a familiar tropic narrative and turn this into something like a melodrama. And we thereby lose the potential to see that we have to more deeply understand what an open society means in such a way that it actually affords us to appropriately orient ourselves towards what's happening right now. And I think all of those that I've previously missed are misapprehensions, and I see them very prevalent in the media and even in social discourse. I'm thinking of an analogy for us, which is the way existentialism, I'm not proposing existentialism, this is meant as an analogy, the way existentialism emerges before, but it goes through the Second World War and comes out in pivotal figures as a fundamentally new way of understanding human being. And I think something like that is what we should be looking for the first sparks of, and perhaps you're already seeing it, Elizabeth, in what you said. And we have to look about how do we properly kindle it and bring it to life. Because if something like that doesn't happen, then the Kairos will pass, and this will just, I don't mean it that way, I don't mean to be dismissive, but this will be relegated to another one of the human tragedies that have befallen us, and it will be put into that category, and nothing will happen other than that categorization. And that's my greatest concern around this, that this will just be another event, another big event. I don't know if I formulated that well, but I'm trying to articulate something here.
Yeah, actually, when you said that it would become another event, I had a slight feeling of nausea.
Yes, that's appropriate.
You know,
yes,
like,
exactly.
That's yeah, the horror of that.
Yeah, and then and like I say, that horror, we shouldn't feel we have alleviated the horror just if we have sort of intense emotional experiences as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciated your bringing that one up first, because I think that that one is very related to the spiritual bypass.
Yes, that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's a gift to the conversation. That's a good analogy for exactly for what I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like, this is an event that the only way we can be worthy of this event and even be worthy of entering into relationship to it, because we're not there, we're not fighting, we're not engaged in the actual life and death struggle, I think, is to properly situate it, like really apprehend what it could mean for how we need to transform our ways of thinking, being, and seeing, such that events like this, in which there is suffering and the open society is put at tremendous risk, become much less probable. And that's something I'm struggling with. I'm not here pronouncing. I'm here in dialogue and hoping to enter into dialogos around this. This for me, I feel like I'm at the edge of aporia about it.
John, if this is okay with you, because Taras, which is the person we talked about, he just he's still here and he raised his hand.
Sure.
And I would like to invite him for a moment or so in this conversation, because he is basically in this. He is not talking about it. And Taras, if you're still here, you lowered your hand again. If you want to come into the conversation.
I am here.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I can hear you. I can see you well too.
Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. This has been a great experience of connection with people who want to contribute their kindness and their minds. And I think your contribution, I might say I expect some contribution from you, because I really respect your intellectual work. I follow your intellectual work, and
thank you.
I'm honored to be here, and I think you're doing a lot of good regardless of this war. But I had a couple specific asks about this situation to you.
Please.
Regarding the Kairos, from scientific perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, I would define Kairos as a phase transition, as the point of phase transition.
Bifurcation, yeah, because of criticality. Yes, exactly.
Where you switch from water, from the liquid stage to the ice. This moment, this precise moment where the whole system changes instantly in a snap.
Yes.
I believe that now we are as society at this point where if we build this open society globally, we could transition to something that might have different names, but it might be truly beautiful place. Some people like Thomas Metzinger are developing, and others developing now the ideas around so-called consciousness ethics. And I've been touched by some of those developments, where essentially we need to look how increase the experiential depths. So the war, for example, it decreases experiential depths, because it narrows our focus, it narrows our attention and awareness. So if we look as the whole society to increase experiential depths, right, but by this notion, we will try to remove war from all planes of existence. Then increase agency. War also does decrease of agency, because we have degrees of freedom. So we need to increase that agency. And finally, and that's, I wanted to talk with you about essentially wisdom, or about some sort of vectors for development of civilization after this war. So the final point, and that's what comes from Thomas Metzinger, that we need to promote emergence of increased experiential depths and agency. And if we have quite simple rules, we can move us as a global society forward. And my particular ask to you was, you think that we might lose this moment of Kairos? What would be your very concrete steps if we have the power? Let's say we have now ability to connect to any living human on Earth right now, and we have media, we have brightest and kindest and the most compassionate people who would you bring on the team? What would be a think tank that can solve problem like this? And imagine today we start in this project. What would be concrete advice on that?
Well, thank you, Taras. Let me first of all respond to the point you made before your question, because that'll help lay the foundation for how the more concrete answer. I think the point you made is central. I think the idea that warfare and the kind of thinking that leads to warfare are symptoms of reciprocal narrowing within the collective intelligence of distributed cognition. So just as individuals can get into reciprocal narrowing, the options in the world are decreasing and their cognitive flexibility is decreasing. And this is Mark Lewis's model of addiction. And I think you're exactly right. There's a form of thinking in the collective intelligence of distributed cognition that goes to reciprocal narrowing. And that if we do not make people aware of this and also aware of the beauty of its counterpoint, which is reciprocal opening, what Plato calls anagage, I think this kind of war will be endemic. We have to get people to wake up to this kind of attractor that takes place in the self-organization of the dynamical systems of groups of people, to speak in somewhat technical language, but we have to get people to orient, as you said, towards the depth of experience. I think that's analogous to what I mean by reciprocal opening, the depth of experience, enhanced agency, and to take an explicit stance towards the power of collective intelligence and stop pretending that we are atomic individuals and that we are not driven by the collective intelligence of distributed cognition. And I think that moves me towards towards answering your question. We need to bring wisdom to the collective intelligence of distributed cognition so that reciprocal opening is more and more afforded and curated and coordinated by a wise collective intelligence as opposed to an addictive, reciprocally narrowing collective intelligence. Who would I want on my team? Well, in some ways, I'm already trying to answer this question. I want the people like Thomas and Elizabeth and Rafe Kelly and Nora Bateson and a ton of other people who are building the alternative communities of practice and an alternative culture. And you think, oh, well, what will these little groups do? My model for this is the Roman Empire dominates the world with an imperial system based on conquest and exploitation. And little groups underneath the radar of Christians build home communities in which they practice ecologies of practices that gave the world new ways of seeing, new ways of being. It's things that now we take for granted. We all think that killing a newborn child is moral horror. But if you look at the ancient world before Christianity, killing a child, infanticide, was considered a normal and expected thing to do. To give one example, the way of agape was birthed and grew underneath the radar of the real politic, of the conquest of the exploitative economy. And it created a wiser form of collective intelligence in an increasingly growing distributed cognition. So those are the people I want. I don't particularly want to talk to world leaders or pundits or journalists. I want to talk to people who are doing they're putting time and talent and resources, and they're putting their economic well-being at risk in order to build these emerging communities. Those are the people I want to talk to. Those are the people I want to network together.
If I may respond to that, John, because there are two things standing out in your response.
Yes.
One, which is still with me, because I have never thought about it in this way, was in some way the birth of existentialism in the Second World War.
Yes.
It's just true. Particularly in the Parisian French milieux, Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, and others around them, this was something that was happening during the time of the Resistance, where they were writing both their theory and their theater and pieces, and it was something that did not really catch politics in the way. I mean, they were engaged, but they were not kind of a government or engaged in the traditional political sense. But they created a whole shift in culture afterwards.
Yes,
that basically is in some ways the foundation of what happened in the after Second World War cultural movement that is still with us these days. That's one thing where the question is, I have a sense what happened with Merleau-Ponty and Sartre and this freedom and the individuality and all that. I can see the spirit that was birthed there seemingly in that time. So what is prevalent right now? What's the potentiality of this situation where we are in this time? This is the one question, and the other is that you again focused. It's not about big politics. It's about creating communities of practice, or let's say networks of practice. And I see this event also one of a knot of this network of practices where we try to come together and have conversations like this, so that these conversations change us.
Yes.
And then a different perspective opens up, and you again basically made the point what the difference is about. One is a closing down of perspective, and the other is an opening up of perspectives.
Yes.
And that raises the question for me. So what is the opening up of perspective that is right now between us possible in that when we are confronted? It's not just the war in the Ukraine, it's the culmination of crisis that we're in, but this war is at this second something that has a tragic and the culmination point of our human existence that hits home like this crisis before did not.
Yes. I'll try and answer both of those, and also keep weaving in a response to Taras. So let's take again the model of Christianity and the proposal of agape. Agape was already existing. Parents were exercising agape. And then there's the proposal of, oh, but this is not just something specific to this, it can open up. Existentialism. People had understood from Stoicism that there's a way in which we're self-interpreting, self-determining, but existentialism says, no, try to make this more central and open it up and see how it has a universal significance. I think we're at a stage where we can grasp the twistedness in the war, in the invasion, especially. It's around this. The war, okay. The war is driven by meaning. It's a cultural action. And some people have talked about this. So I want to say this, and I want to say it carefully, and it's not completely right. So that's why I'm taking care. But it's driven by meaning, and it's powered by a misapprehension of what meaning is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and that the opportunity we have is to take, we all know what that is in our individual lives. And I'm trying to do the analogy. We all knew it, like before Christianity, you get agape, right? And before existentialism, yeah, there's a degree to which I'm self-interpreting, self-determining. But what they did is they said, no, there's a depth to this. We all know that, where we realize, oh, I've been motivated by, I'm trying to get, right, this particular, I'm trying to get the meaning of this, and I'm being driven by that, but I'm misapprehending it. And this is why Socrates is so pertinent, because he was, again and again and again, he gets people to realize they're pursuing happiness, but they're powered by a misapprehension of happiness. That's the fundamental thing that is tearing them apart and causing them to hurt themselves and other people. And I think we have an opportunity to here to break out of that. We are misframing meaning in a way because we're caught in this profound performative contradiction of pursuing it while misapprehending it. And it's driving us in this self-deceptive, self-destructive manner. And I'm going to say something and it'll sound trite, just like agape is trite, and just like, existentialism trite. We have the opportunity of making meaning sacred as something distinct from wealth, from contentment, from subjective well-being, etc. And one of the things we're seeing, I would argue, and in the sense of admiring in the Ukrainians, is the degree to which they are willing to sacrifice all those other things for a symbolic meaning. And I don't mean just see, even when I say that, we're trained to think, oh, it's just symbolic. That's not, I'm trying to say something and I don't have the right words. Right? They're trying to, right, say, no, there's a way of life that has a meaning that we are prepared to sacrifice wealth and subjective well-being, our lives for. And we need to properly cultivate reverence for that, but not relegate it to this, although this is a crucial Kairos instant. Don't say, well, it's just there then. We have to do what happened in Christianity and existentialism. The existentialists didn't come out of say, well, this applies to France. They said, no, this is something all human beings need to confront. That's what I'm trying to say here.
There's just one thing I just want to highlight, because it's also delicate.
Yes.
To go into this dimension in this conversation, because there's a war right now, and
I almost didn't want to do this, Thomas. Sorry for interrupting you. I almost didn't want to do that. You can tell throughout that I am very concerned with being disrespectful.
Yeah,
I mean that in a deep way. I'm very concerned about that. And so I'm trying to be helpful. Yeah. And I'm asking, and that's why I know I'm making mistakes, and I'm asking for charity, because of the intent is not to do that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly where I wanted to go, because that's the way I understand you. And I wanted to also compare you with the existentialists, because they did what you're pointing to. At the same time, the existentialists were also part of the resistance.
Yes.
So, and both is legitimate, but you're talking about a different dimension that was beyond being part of the resistance.
Yes.
And I just want to make the point, the dimension that you're bringing with this existentialism is not kind of saying being part of the resistance is not important. It's making the point that something else is also happening, that maybe is a Kairos that we also have to see here, also beyond the war, without making anything. And again, it's tricky territory, because there's war going on. How can one talk about this? But I really see that, at least it's how I understand it, that part of the heroism that I experience from the Ukrainians is from this taking on meaning in a particular way that is very powerful, and they're willing really to put their life for this right now. And this is a moment that has also Kairos, because it is so real, so
yes,
down to earth real, but it has the dimension that you are touching.
But I would like to say that I see this embodied in Taras. And I see this embodied in Taras, and I see that what he's pointing to is a different kind of love that we have known, and that he is standing where he's standing, and he is seeing the future in cosmic terms. And I don't mean that in a fluffy way. I mean that in an evolutionary, as an evolutionary necessity. But there's a love in it, a love for life. And I don't mean that in a trivial way, like bon vivant, I love life, but as a sacred, a recognition of that which is most sacred as being life, the continuation, the complexification, the meaningfulness of life, that is at the same time an expression of a care, a love that is something that we haven't seen in the same before. And I think that when you speak about the Catholic Church and the early church and those pockets, part of what was magnetizing, and I think part of why this is a Kairos moment, is that it is making public this love, of this meaningfulness of life itself.
That's exactly it. They're like, the Christians are being persecuted, and yet the persecution strengthens the faith.
Right.
Right. And so for me, that's a sign usually of something is about to be born, as opposed to it being eradicated or steamrolled over. Right. And so, and that's been that, well, I mean, I can say this objectively, this has caught so many people off by surprise. Right? How deeply the Ukrainian people have been willing to fight and resist, and how the persecution is actually strengthening their resolve in a very powerful way. And so I wonder, I don't know if I would have that courage. I hope I would aspire to it. But I at least want to understand what it is that is coming to pass, so that I can, again, enter into right relationship with it. What is the virtue that I should be cultivating in order to be responsible for the Kairos in here? The Kairos is here so that the Kairos is realized. And like I said, so that what a new way of seeing and being can be properly birthed. I don't think there's nothing that ultimately justifies war. War is hell. But the only thing that retrospectively makes it tolerable for us ethically is if something like that happens. And my great fear is that, like I said, when I meant this would be just another event, is that the event will unfold and then nothing happens. I think
there is also one point from what you said that I further want to respond to, because you talked about the sacredness of meaning.
Yes. And moving meaning off of how we most prevalently understand it.
Yeah. And I would like to connect this directly to deep dialogue, to dialogos.
Yes.
Because part of my experience and my understanding of deep dialogue is that the sacred shows itself in the openness of the dialogical. field. There's something where creating meaning out of an open dialogue where meaning is unfolding itself, is experienced, and I see this again and again, as a sacred revelation, if I may use this word. And there is a form where the understanding of sacredness changes, because we have traditional understanding of the sacred.
Yes.
But there's, for me, and that's for me connected to what is happening right now, also different we spaces and dialogue forms and the meaning crisis that you're pointing to, that in this dialogue, when we find mutual understanding, meaning shows up in a way that the experience is being sacred.
That's beautiful. So it's not just a new sacredness of meaning, it's a new meaning of sacredness. Right, the two are being interwoven together. That's that's brilliant, Thomas. That's exactly right. And then the fact that we cannot make that. We cannot be. It's not an artifact to be produced. It's not a product, a commodity. It's not something that. It's something that, by definition, has to have a life of its own in order for it to be sacred and meaningful in the way we're talking about it. And so that's how it's bound up with reciprocal opening. Reciprocal narrowing is right, the opposite. And so if we want, the connection just made, it's sort of reverberating through me. That's kind of, there's a sense in which this is like responding to this in the appropriate virtuous fashion should be properly connected to ameliorating, addressing the meaning crisis, such that the deeply embedded patterns of thought and conception, our cognitive grammar, are fundamentally transformed. And that has to be through a fundamental change in our ontological stance towards sacredness. And I think if we could get people individually and collectively into communities in which there is reverence for the cultivation of that emerging stance towards sacredness, that we could do what I'm seeking. We could make the possibility of these kinds of wars diminish significantly.
Go ahead, Taras.
Yes.
Do you think that it's possible to do without relinquishing of self-interest? Because with meaning and what you were describing as a connection, and I want to tie existentialism here. Camus is my personal hero, and how he replied to war. And I'm thinking, when you think about death and whether you're ready to die, and thinking how he was answering that, that's one of the example from person from secular domain who answered that very honestly, who answered that if nothing has meaning, and it could be connected to contemplative traditions of the past, everything is emptiness. And in that emptiness, I'm finding the spark of light and beauty, and I'm ready to die for that. And I'm ready to completely relinquish myself. And that ties to meaning. I believe that meaning can be defined as externalization of self-interest. I'm saying my self-interest is less important than the survival of the system. And that in biology, it doesn't work, because if we work from information theory or genetics, there is no meaning in organism besides of proliferation of some structures that can mutate and replicate. But humans can create the meaning in understanding of the organism. None of the genes understand the whole structure of the but we understand it, and we as human now can generate that structure that can self-propel, can emerge and, let's say, spread through the universe with kindness and love. And this idea of meaning where you externalized, it could be put as sort of collective consciousness, where you say that my life is important, but less important than life of organism, because we're all gonna die in 10 to the hundreds million years, and there's gonna be no life. So we are only this tiny, tender pocket of life, and we're not gonna exist for long. So we don't need to fight. And this existence, it could be our meaning, because there will be nothing. And if we externalize there could be just one universal meaning in that. So the question to you, do you think that without relinquishing of self-interest, without relinquishing of egoism, it's possible to build such cohesive system?
So, I mean, I think that's a brilliant question. I believe you cited, was it Camus you cited? Yeah, yes. In The Plague, Taru has spoken something which is kind of a slogan I've adopted for Taru. One of the characters says, "I want to learn how to be a saint without God." That's the whole problem I'm up against. And so notice what he's doing to do. He's trying to do exactly what we're trying to do. He's trying to figure out how to bring back, sainthood, a sacredness of personhood without the traditional structures that usually situated it. And so I think invoking that is completely appropriate. Secondly, your point about the externalization, that's exactly it. So, and this is what the Christians discovered with agape. So normally our lives are, how are things relevant to me? How are things relevant to me? That's called the glue of cognition. But in meaning in life, we turn the arrow around. People find their lives meaningful if they feel deeply connected to something that has an existence and a value beyond their egocentric preferences and concerns. This is what typically happens in agape when you have a child. See, the Christians found out that agape is one of the most powerful ways of turning the arrow around, because when you have a child, if you're a good parent, and of course we all struggle to be good parents, but it's not how is the child relevant to me, it's how am I relevant to the child. And that's what makes having a child so meaningful to us. So I think you're right. I think we need to have that reorientation. I'll be even stronger. I don't think we can properly pursue meaning as that sense of connectedness unless we can bring about that important reversal of the arrow of relevance. And I want to add something more to that, which is, I'll take a philosopher who is maybe the epitome of logical rationalism, Spinoza. And Spinoza said, he says repeatedly, reason cannot make us happy. And he doesn't mean what we mean by happiness. He means meaningful, a life he called blessed. And that's because reason can work within and will in no way challenge egocentrism. He actually proposed that something like love is what is needed in order to orient us out of egocentrism. Iris Murdoch famously said, love is when you recognize something other than yourself as real. And so in answer to your question, Taras, I think that if we deeply understand meaning and love and reason, and there's a lot more I could say about all of these, but I'm just trying to give you the gist for the answer, then there is no way to bring about this sacralization of meaning and a new meaning to the sacred without overcoming egocentrism,
narcissism.
But I think it's very deep. I think it's very deep. And we have lost a lot of the historical institutions that used to help people in this very difficult task of overcoming a very insinuating and often invisible egocentrism. We all know we shouldn't be selfish, and I'm Canadian. We're relentlessly polite and we have good manners and all that sort of stuff. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something really profound and deep. And I think one of the things war can do, and this is no attempt on my part to justify war, I think it's always a horror in the proper metaphysical sense of the word, but one of the things that war can do is remind us of how real the real is outside of our egocentrism. And I think, I mean, we're in apocalyptic times in which the four horsemen of the apocalypse, you can read that, and I'm not reading it as like a fundamentalist Christian, but we've had plague and now we've had war, because these are the things that wake us up from deep illusions of self-sufficiency and egocentrism.
I I would like to bring it back also to your point into the Kairos.
Yes.
Because one way of understanding this war that I think really is important from that it's about power and everything, but it is also, as you pointed to, it is about our understanding of meaning, because part of what is happening in the crisis that we are in is a revolt of the, if I may call them this way, the sacred traditions against the abyss of modernity and postmodernity. In a fundamentalist way. And part, at least, how the Russian culture perceives this war is also a war of the sacred Russia and against the godless, decadent West. And what we are talking about is in this confrontation, because there's a lot, I think, which is true in this, in the way not only the Russians, also the fundamentalist Hindu in India, or Erdogan in Turkey, or Iran, or fundamentalist Christians. It's all around this revolt of this fundamentalist sacred traditions against the meaning crisis that you're describing. That is the nihilism of our time. But in this, I find right now, and this I think what we are talking about, that there is a new understanding of meaning in its sacredness. That's exactly in the openness of dialogue where it's showing up. It shows that there is a different understanding where we can find sacredness, which is not fundamentalist, reactionary, which is not a closing down, but an opening up.
Exactly. All the things you point to, Thomas, are they epitomize what I meant by they're powered by meaning, but they're driven by a misapprehension of meaning. That's exactly it. And the fact that this is showing up all over the world is what I mean by saying, like, the war in Ukraine has a symbolic value in that it can alert us to the fact that this is a comprehensive Kairos in the world right now. And so for example, I think it's hypocritical for us to denounce the war if we are not offering a new birth of sacredness and meaning to the world. Because if we are still going to run with the illusion that meaning is the same as subjective well-being, and subjective well-being is the same as wealth, and we will collapse all those together, then if we do not break those apart as a response to this, I do not know from where we are standing such that we can non-hypocritically condemn the war. Because we are participating in the dissemination of a cultural cognitive grammar that makes these kinds of events that you've listed, Thomas, more and more probable and prevalent.
It's almost the inner dimension of climate change. It's the inner climate, that catastrophe.
I think that's a good analogy. I think that the analogy is right. Of course, you need to understand the concrete specifics and the causal patterns of climate change. Of course, you need to understand, the socioeconomic status. But as many people have been pointing out, right, that's not what is preventing an adequate response. What is needed is a fundamental reinterpretation, like what Christianity did, like what existentialism did, about what it means to be a human being leading a good life.
And I think that that's where we need to wrap.
I'm sorry, I wished I could have done much better.
No, I appreciate it very much, and thank you to bring this dimension to this conversation, because it is, as you said, there is a Kairos potential in this.
Yes.
But only if you respond.
Yes. I still feel my response was inadequate, but I hope you can I hope people will at least see my aspiration to respond and to take responsibility.
Taras, thank you again.
Taras, it was a great pleasure meeting you, and I hope that you found that my answers to your question were offered in good faith and with the best reflection I could bring to bear right now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your presence and your work. If we'll make a ministry of meaning and wisdom, would you work with us?
Yes, count me in. I will be there. I will be there. I will work for free. So yes, very much.
We'll contact you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Taras. Thank you, John. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I tend to avoid speaking about things that are enmeshed in the political arena, because the political arena is a monster that is chewing up people's lives and spitting out this kind of chaos. But I had trust and faith that you two would properly curate this so that we could get below the superficial noise and hear the still small voice of true reason. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll make a short break and we'll meet again top of the hour.
Yeah, 5 minutes and we'll be back.
Take care, everyone. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, John.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.